My boss told me to close the file, but all I wanted was to open her heart. The office had that quiet, late afternoon hum, the kind of stillness where every small sound seemed amplified. The soft click of keyboards, the faint rustle of papers, even the low buzz of the air conditioning, all blended into a background that made him hyper-aware of everything around him. And then there was her. She moved through the space with a natural grace, the kind that only comes from someone completely comfortable in their own skin. He noticed the subtle sway of her hips as she walked past his desk, the soft fragrance of her perfume lingering in the air long after she'd gone. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to make him pause and inhale quietly, as if savoring something forbidden. She carried herself with authority, yet there was a gentleness in the way she adjusted the collar of her blouse or tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Little details, but they left a lasting impression. He was young, observant, and a little inexperienced in matters of subtle attraction, but he could tell that there was more to her than the polished exterior. The way she furrowed her brow when focused, or how her lips curved slightly when thinking, hinted at a depth he couldn't ignore. It was the kind of detail most people overlooked, but not him. Their first interaction was almost mundane, a folder she handed him across the desk, but the touch lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. His fingers brushed hers, just lightly enough to be accidental, yet enough to send an electric jolt through him. She gave a brief smile, almost imperceptible, that held a warmth he hadn't expected. "Close that file when you're done," she said, her voice steady, professional, yet there was a softness beneath the command, a rhythm that made his chest tighten slightly. He managed a nod, words caught somewhere between duty and the curiosity rising inside him. As she walked away, he found himself stealing glances, noticing the subtle arch of her back, the way sunlight caught the highlights in her hair, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate without effort. He wasn't sure if she noticed him noticing, but that thought, the possibility of mutual awareness, sent a thrill through him he couldn't quite name. By the end of the day, nothing had happened. No words beyond office-necessary exchanges, no dramatic gestures. And yet, everything had changed. In the quiet of his own thoughts, he replayed every glance, every brush of her hand, every hint of a smile. Something had sparked, subtle and almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. And he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he would never see the office the same way again. The days that followed were quieter, slower, almost suspended in a kind of private rhythm that only the two of them seemed to share. The office felt different now. He noticed the way light slanted through the blinds in the morning, catching the edge of her shoulder as she walked past, or the way the soft hum of the printer became an almost musical backdrop to their unspoken connection. It wasn't just her appearance that held him, it was the small, human gestures that went unnoticed by everyone else. The way she rubbed her temple when she was thinking too hard, the faint tension in her shoulders after a long call, or the gentle sigh she let out when finally sitting down at her desk. These were moments of vulnerability he was privileged to witness, and they drew him closer in ways he didn't fully understand yet. He found himself observing more than speaking, learning the rhythm of her day, when she laughed quietly at something in her emails, when she paused to straighten a crooked picture frame, the way her fingers lingered over the keyboard when she was lost in thought. He noticed when she drank her coffee too fast, when she tapped her pen absent-mindedly, when her eyes softened for a brief second after glancing at him from across the room. Each detail became a thread, weaving an invisible connection between them, delicate yet undeniable. She, too, seemed aware of his quiet attentiveness, though she never acknowledged it outright. Occasionally, her gaze would meet his across the office, holding a fraction longer than expected, and he would feel the warmth of her attention like sunlight on his skin. It wasn't flirtation in any obvious sense, it was subtler, almost imperceptible, but it sent a steady undercurrent of tension through the day. Their interactions were small but charged. A folder exchanged across the desk, their fingers brushing, a brief comment on a report, her voice lilting with a softness he could not place, a shared glance when someone else made a mistake in a meeting. Each moment was loaded with meaning, yet contained within the bounds of professional decorum. By the end of the week, he realized he was no longer just noticing her, it was as if he was learning her, discovering her nuances, and quietly cherishing them. And though nothing overt had passed between them, the tension in those quiet observations had grown, simmering beneath polite conversation and routine office work. He understood, with a thrill that both excited and unnerved him, that their story was only beginning, written in the language of fleeting touches, lingering looks, and unspoken recognition of something neither of them yet had words for. It was one of those late afternoons when the office felt almost empty, the soft hum of computers and distant chatter from other floors forming a private cocoon around them. She leaned against the edge of his desk, papers in hand, her posture relaxed yet weighted with the invisible burden she carried. There was a softness in her eyes today, a quiet crack in the armor she wore so confidently in meetings and in public. He noticed it immediately. The subtle way her shoulders slumped, the fleeting shadow of fatigue under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands as she arranged her documents. He had always admired her composure, her effortless control of the office and her team, but today something human and vulnerable peeked through. And he couldn't look away. I don't know if I handled that client well, she admitted quietly, almost as if afraid the words themselves would betray her. She ran a hand over her face, exhaling slowly, the weight of her own expectations pressing down. It was a rare moment, unguarded, and he felt the pull of responsibility and care tug at him. He offered a soft smile, letting his voice remain steady. You did your best. That's all anyone can ask for. He didn't try to fix the problem or provide a solution. He simply listened, letting her words rest in the space between them, his presence a quiet reassurance. There was a pause, where neither moved, where the hum of the office seemed louder than usual. She let her hand brush his arm lightly, a gesture that could have been accidental, but lingered just long enough to leave warmth in its wake. He felt it keenly, a small, steady pulse of closeness, and it made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time, he realized the depth of her humanity beyond the sharp suits, confident demeanor, and professional authority. She was someone who carried the weight of responsibility with elegance, yes, but she also bore her doubts, her fears, and her private struggles in ways no one else got to see. And in that moment, he felt privileged, almost reverent, to witness it. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the office ceased to exist. There was no hierarchy here, no boss, no employee, just two people, navigating the fragile terrain of trust and unspoken understanding. The warmth of her hand on his arm, the softness in her voice, and the vulnerability in her gaze all combined to create a tension that was neither overt nor urgent, but profoundly intimate. By the end of that day, something had shifted. The connection they had been cultivating in small glances and fleeting touches had deepened, threading emotional intimacy into the subtle tension that had always existed. He knew, with quiet certainty, that their story was moving forward, not in dramatic gestures, but in these tender, human moments where hearts quietly reached for each other, aware of the risk, but drawn irresistibly closer nonetheless. The office that day seemed lighter somehow, as if the air itself had softened. It was the kind of afternoon where sunlight spilled lazily across the desks, catching the edges of papers and the glint of coffee mugs. He watched her from across the room, noticing the way her hair shimmered in the light, how her posture relaxed ever so slightly when she laughed, a rare, unguarded sound that made his chest tighten with quiet delight. Their interaction began as it often did, mundane and professional. A misfiled report, a small clerical error, but this time, it sparked laughter, genuine and spontaneous. He had made a teasing comment about the mix-up, careful not to overstep, and she had returned it with a soft chuckle, the corners of her eyes crinkling in amusement. It was a small moment, almost trivial to anyone else, but to him it was a glimpse into her human side, confident, sharp, yet capable of joy that was completely unaffected by titles or hierarchy. They moved toward the break room together, carrying coffee cups, their conversation light and easy, punctuated by smiles and quiet jokes. He noticed how she leaned slightly closer than necessary when she spoke, the faint brush of her sleeve against his arm sending a warmth up his spine. Every glance she offered was measured but lingering, her eyes finding his across the counter, holding them a fraction longer than politeness required. It wasn't just the laughter that captivated him, it was the intimacy embedded in these small gestures. When she reached for the sugar, their fingers brushed. A subtle touch, seemingly accidental, yet charged with an unspoken acknowledgement of the closeness they shared. He felt the heat of her hand, the steady pulse beneath her skin, and for a brief moment, the entire office faded into the background. Even their silences carried weight. He could read her moods in the tilt of her head, the soft exhale when she leaned against the counter, the way she glanced at him before taking a sip of coffee. Each observation was a brushstroke painting a picture of someone he was beginning to know, not just as a boss or a superior, but as a person, complex, alluring, and quietly vulnerable. By the end of the break, the subtle tension had grown more pronounced. They returned to their desks, carrying the warmth of shared laughter in the spaces between them. The office had returned to its normal rhythm, but he knew that something had shifted. What had been curiosity, admiration, and tentative attraction was evolving into something more tender, a slow, undeniable draw toward each other that neither wanted to name aloud. Even the smallest smiles, the softest touches, or the quietest moments together were now charged with possibility. And as he watched her settle back into her chair, sunlight catching the edge of her hair, he felt it clearly, the story between them was deepening, not through grand gestures, but through these small, human moments that made the heart lean in closer, quietly, patiently, and with irresistible longing. The office was almost empty that evening, the usual hum of activity replaced by the faint, distant echoes of footsteps and the soft whir of computers in standby. The air felt different, heavier in a way that made his chest tighten with anticipation. He had stayed late to finish a project, and by chance, or perhaps fate, she lingered too, leaning against a desk just a few feet away from him. For the first time, the professional distance that had defined their interaction seemed to fade. The glow from the desk lamp cast her features in warm, golden light, softening the edges of her usual composure. She seemed smaller in the quiet office, less like the authoritative boss everyone respected and more like someone vulnerable and entirely human. His gaze lingered, drinking in the subtle curve of her shoulder, the gentle slope of her neck, the way her eyes darted away when she caught him staring, not with annoyance, but with a quiet awareness. Sometimes, he began, voice low, unsure if he wanted to speak or simply let the moment hang, I feel like. I want more than just to hand you these files. I want you to, he stopped, the words faltering under the weight of propriety and the unspoken rules that bound them. She tilted her head, curiosity and caution dancing in her eyes. The faintest trace of a smile tugged at her lips, but it was tempered with hesitation. Be careful what you say, she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual authority. There was a softness there, a vulnerability he had never heard in her tone before. Taking a breath, he tried again, quieter this time, almost as if confessing a secret to the air itself. I want you to open yourself to me, not just professionally, but everything in between. She froze for a heartbeat. Then her hand brushed his arm, lightly, almost shyly, but long enough to leave warmth pulsing through him. He felt her heartbeat, rapid and uneven under his fingers, and the tension that had simmered in their interactions until now reached a sharp, electric peak. For a moment, neither moved. Time seemed suspended, the quiet office around them fading into insignificance. There was desire in the air, yes, but it was layered with caution, restraint, and the fragile vulnerability that comes from risking emotional exposure. She looked at him, eyes glimmering with conflict and curiosity, and he realized that he was seeing her not as a superior or a figure of authority, but as someone who was willing, even tentatively, to trust him with her heart. By the time the moment passed, the air between them was charged but still unspoken. Their professional boundaries had not been broken, yet something had undeniably shifted. The slow burn of their connection had intensified, tempered by hesitation, desire, and mutual understanding. And in that quiet, golden-lit office, the possibility of something more hung in the air, delicate, unspoken, and utterly intoxicating. The days that followed felt quieter, yet somehow heavier with unspoken understanding. Every glance, every casual brush of hands, seemed to carry a weight that neither could ignore. The office, once a place of routine and structure, had become a private world where subtle touches and lingering looks spoke louder than words ever could. It began in small, almost imperceptible ways. She would pause at his desk slightly longer than necessary, letting her hand linger on the edge of the table as she passed him a folder. He noticed the gentle rise and fall of her chest with each breath, the faint warmth radiating from her presence. In return, he offered attentiveness without expectation, small gestures, a supportive word, a careful observation of her moods, allowing trust to grow in the quiet spaces between them. One evening, as the office emptied and the sun dipped low, casting the room in warm, amber light, they found themselves side by side, reviewing a report. Their shoulders brushed, and for the first time, they didn't pull away. He felt the subtle tension in her body relax, a quiet acknowledgement that they were both aware of the closeness, and willing to exist in it, even if only for a moment. Their conversation drifted from work to life, carefully navigating the line between personal and professional. She spoke softly of the pressures she carried, the doubts that rarely left her mind, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes accompanied her strength. He listened, offering comfort not through grand gestures but through presence, through the quiet attentiveness that let her feel understood without needing to explain everything. Then came the touch that lingered, unspoken yet full of meaning. Her fingers brushed his as they both reached for the same document. Neither moved away. Instead, their hands remained close, almost touching, a spark of warmth threading through the simple contact. He felt her heartbeat, steady but quickened by proximity, and in that moment, a profound intimacy bloomed, one that had nothing to do with words, titles, or expectations, and everything to do with trust, recognition, and shared understanding. Later, a quiet hug emerged almost naturally, prompted by a moment of vulnerability. She rested her head lightly against his chest, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulder, holding her with a tenderness that spoke of safety and care. Their breaths synchronized, and for a fleeting moment, the entire office fell away, leaving only the quiet convergence of their emotions, longing, trust, and an unspoken promise of connection. By the end of that evening, something had undeniably shifted. The slow burn of desire had evolved into a tender, emotionally anchored intimacy. No words were needed, every glance, every touch, and every shared silence had become a language of its own, a language that spoke of patience, mutual respect, and the quiet certainty that they were slowly, irreversibly drawing closer, together. By the time the week drew to a close, the office had transformed in subtle, unspoken ways. What had once been a space of routine and formal boundaries had become a haven of shared understanding and quiet connection. Every glance, every smile, and every gentle touch carried the weight of the intimacy they had carefully nurtured, and the slow-burn tension that had once made their hearts race now rested in a warm, steady rhythm. It started with the little things. A hand lingering on a folder just a second longer than necessary. A shared laugh over a trivial mistake, the kind of moment that once might have passed unnoticed. Coffee breaks became opportunities not just for conversation, but for closeness, elbows brushing as they reached for sugar, shoulders almost touching as they leaned in to discuss work. The unspoken acknowledgement of each other's presence was now a constant, comforting undercurrent. One afternoon, sunlight poured through the blinds, illuminating her hair and casting a gentle glow across the desk where he sat. She stood nearby, watching him with that same quiet curiosity that had first drawn him in. He looked up and met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no restraint, only the calm certainty that they had arrived at a shared understanding of what this connection meant. Their hands met briefly, fingers entwining almost by accident, yet neither pulled away. Instead, they lingered in that small, tender contact, allowing the warmth of their closeness to settle over them. A gentle squeeze, a shared smile, and suddenly the office felt less like a workplace and more like a space where two hearts had found each other. Even their silences spoke volumes. Sitting side by side, reviewing reports, or simply organizing papers, there was a quiet comfort in being near each other. Her head would brush his shoulder ever so slightly, his hand might rest near hers, and in those fleeting moments, they communicated everything words could not: trust, care, admiration, and a gentle, steady pull of affection. By the end of the day, when the office lights dimmed and the corridors were quiet, they shared a lingering parting, a hand squeeze, a soft smile, a gentle brush of the cheek. It was a farewell that promised presence, closeness, and connection beyond the walls of the office. No grand declarations were necessary. The depth of their bond was evident in the subtle, meaningful ways they had chosen to be near each other. The story concluded not with dramatic gestures, but with emotional fulfillment. The slow-burn romance had blossomed into something tender, enduring, and wholly human. Age, titles, and professional boundaries had not hindered them. Instead, the careful cultivation of trust, attention, and affection had created a love that was warm, YouTube-safe, and deeply satisfying, a connection that lingered quietly, powerfully, and beautifully in the hearts of both. If you enjoyed this slow-burn romance and the subtle sparks between them, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who do you relate to most in this story, the observant young man or the graceful, mysterious boss? We'd love to hear your take.